Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of Eggs. Today's guest is one that I am extremely excited about. I've stalked him on Instagram for a while now, and I was happy when he said he was willing to come on the show. Our guest today is Ken Pooch van Druten. Ken is best known for his work as a front-of-house engineer for artists like Whitney Houston, Jay-Z, Alice in Chains, the Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins, Linkin Park, Stone Temple Pilots, and last but not least, Ryan's favorite artist of all time, Justin Bieber. So, without any further delay, please welcome our guest, Ken Pooch van Druten. Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, guys. How are you? Living in this crazy, mad world of living inside for weeks, but yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, I imagine your career got a little quiet right now. So unless you're mixing folks for live streams.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. You know, my industry is so weird right now, right? Like we're going to be the last ones to go back to work probably. I think there's a lot of people that are really scared. I mean, much like anyone else in the world, but our industry in particular will probably be the last ones to go back to work. So yeah, it's a weird time.
Yeah, it makes sense. Man. I saw something yesterday, I think from 21 Pilots putting together some fundraisers for their crew. And I thought it was really interesting, because it's not the thing you think of, right? When you think of your favorite artist or you think of the favorite concert or whatever, like you think of your guy, right? You think of whoever's singing or, performing, and, you don't think of the 100 dudes it took to build that stage in, 12 hours. And so it's pretty amazing.
It is, man. It's amazing. I always tell people, everyone that I know, of course, my family and friends, they all go, "Oh, you have the most amazing job in the world." And I go, "Well, come visit, and watch me work for 16 hours while we're putting a stage together, like what you said, there's all kinds of hard work that happens behind the scenes before,
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's such a glamorous career, because you're rubbing elbows with such, people that are of high esteem in our society, these singers and musicians and performers. And, they just don't see the rest. They show up at 7:30, wait in line for an hour and come watch the show. They didn't see you get there at 6:00 yesterday and start building a stage.
Yeah, totally. What's weird is that people don't understand that, like, if you go and see a show in an arena, when we show up there at like 6 a.m, there is nothing there. There's no stage. There's no lighting. There's no sound. There's no, none of the things that you see are there at 6 a.m. And then by 6 o'clock at night, when everyone is being led into the building, it's thousands and thousands of pounds of gear that's hanging over the stage that we built in less than 12 hours. I always say that we build a house and tear it down every day. That's basically what we do.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And it really is incredible. And especially, some of these bigger acts. I know that you've recently been front of house for Iron Maiden.
Yes.
These guys, their stages, it's not like just putting up a stage for your going out to the local, parade or, sound hall or something. These are serious productions. With hydraulic lifts and actuators and fire and everything. It's like, this isn't just building a stage. it's an act of engineering. It really is.
Yeah. When we were talking about the amount of people that are involved, for something like that, there are like 40, 45 people that travel with the band and their whole job is to do that. But then there's another 100 people that we hire locally. So all of it is 145 people's jobs every day to do that. And so, all of those people every single day, we're all out of work right now. And so it's a large community of people that don't have jobs right now.
Yeah. So I've got to ask before Mike takes you down something more interesting while I've got your ear. So have you been on the airplane? Have you been on the Iron Maiden?
Actually, I have not. So they stopped doing that. I've worked for them for 3 years now. And the previous tour was when they were driving around in that airplane and prior to that.
Gotcha.
So I haven't.
I should probably clarify for listeners. One of the interesting facts about Iron Maiden is their singer, Bruce Dickinson, is a commercial airplane pilot. So they have the Ed Force One, the 747 that they fly and tour. And it's kind of unique in the music industry.
Yeah, it is. I'm kind of bummed that I haven't had that opportunity yet. But yeah.
Well, Lord willing, you'll get it.
Hopefully. Yeah, we'll see.
So, Ken, as I was kind of telling you earlier, we're not really going to go down the audio rabbit hole like most of your listeners and followers would like us to. our listeners are more business centric and kind of want the overview story. And with that, let's start kind of at the beginning. I heard you started off with music fairly early in life, as young as 3 with the piano. Is that accurate, or is...
It is. So my mother played classical piano. And so when I was first born, I was, put in the bassinet underneath the piano as she rehearsed and practiced. So I've had music in my veins, since I was born. But at age 3, they started me on piano lessons. And so from age 3 to like probably 13 or 14, I was, by the time I was 13, I was doing like competition, classical piano competition.
So I have to ask, because I kind of had a similar upbringing. I was doing Suzuki at 5 or 6, and my mom had the cassette tapes. I'd get in the van and she'd hit play, and that's all I would listen to is All the Turk by Mozart and stuff like that. So I is that the same method that you were in?
It wasn't Suzuki, but I had a really intense piano teacher. And it was all those things like, I would get these busts. I remember there was these little busts of like Mozart and Bach and, whatever. And those were like the prizes for when I would complete a certain, whatever. I just remember that in my childhood, I had a whole bookshelf of these weird plastic busts of all the composers, classical composers. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty intense. It was, I had a lesson that was 2 hours every week. And I was probably practicing, towards the end, I was practicing like 2 hours a day, probably, with my mother forcing me to, pretty much.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you stopped around 13, 14. That sounds about the time you start looking to be cool.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Right then I decided that I probably wasn't going to get the girls by being a classical piano guy. So I picked up other instruments. I picked up like guitar, bass, and drums, which I thought were going to get me the girls. So yeah, that's what happened.
Well, and you formed a punk band, right?
I did.
Right around that time, you got in a punk band, and you guys won a Battle of the Bands, which took you to LA to record.
That's crazy. You guys have done a lot of research. Yes, that's exactly what happened.
Okay. So
talk about that experience.
Talk about that and how it changed your life.
Yeah, you went from classical guitar to all of a sudden, classical piano to punk rock guitar, which I'm sure is an abomination to your piano instructors and everybody else.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just talk about that, a little bit, and how getting down to LA do you spend a lot of time in LA anyway? I know you're a Texas guy now. I mean, was that a big thing for you back then?
No. So it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. I was a horrible teenager and was like, getting into all kinds of trouble, and basically got kicked out of a couple of public high schools, and then kicked out of a private high school, and finally got sent away to boarding school. And that boarding school was near Los Angeles. And it was a performance arts boarding school, similar to, if you've ever seen the old show called Fame. It was a lot like that. It was like, all the students were different kinds of people. They were musicians and actors and, whatever. And that was the school. So during the day, there was general studies of math and whatever. But in the afternoons and into the evenings was all like, music and acting and, all of those kind of things. And I went from being a horrible teenager to going to that and really flourishing because it's what I wanted to do. So my parents gave me a great opportunity. And so that punk band was actually a band that was formed amongst the musicians in that school. And we won a Battle of the Bands that was a local kind of Battle of the Bands. And the prize for that was a weekend in the studio in Los Angeles, or in a recording studio in Los Angeles. And so I spent that weekend in Los Angeles, like not even paying attention. I was playing guitar in that band, and I was like, I don't even care. I want to know what that guy is doing, meaning the producer and the engineer. And that's really where I got my first taste of what I do now. And that was like, I knew immediately that was what I wanted to do.
That's amazing that you had that opportunity.
For sure.
I worked with a few bands earlier on in my career, and I never really got to sit through the actual recording process, but I toured a couple studios, and my eyes were like, man, this is cool. This is the greatest thing ever. And a few years later, I was able to go to school for recording arts, and it's been an interesting roller coaster ride so far, and I'm excited for the next 20 years.
Good for you, man. Yeah. You know what? It is, I know that I am blessed and lucky to be in the position that I'm in the sense of I do a job that I love. 98% of the people on this planet don't get an opportunity to do a job that they love. And so I definitely recognize that, you and I are in a position that's very blessed.
Yeah. So after you went through the studio with the Battle of the Bands, you ended up in Berkeley. You went to the College of Music at Berkeley. And did you kind of start looking into the different options after you went through the studio and were trying to figure out the best route? How did you settle on Berkeley, and why?
That's really an interesting story. I had no intention of going to music school, and a friend of mine at that performance arts boarding school, high school, applied to Berkeley. He had every intention of going to music school, and he said, "Hey man, I'm applying to Berkeley. You should look at it." And I was like, "Nah, I don't really, I don't know, whatever." And I applied, and he didn't get in and I got in, which is a weird situation. Like, I think 25 years later, we kind of found each other on Facebook, and he is like, now he's an insurance salesman or something. And so it's like, even it was weird, like 25 years later, like awkward, like, he's mad at me that I went down the path, I guess, but whatever. I mean, it is what it is. That's how it happened. I really lucked into it. But after I got accepted, I started really doing like the research on it and was like, wow, this is an amazing school. And I'm really lucky that I got in. But yeah, there was no like, hey, I'm going to Berkeley and I'm going to study, it was like, I totally fell into that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Go right ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, okay. So, I mean, as we're progressing through your career, you went from bad student to great student, apparently. And then, okay, school's done, you're moving on. Like, where is music factoring in and all this? Like, so, I mean, are you still playing yourself? Have you started working with other bands while you're going through school? Like, how are we progressing into this path?
It's weird because music has always been like a major part of my life. But I've had this really strange journey. My parents, although my mom was a musician and, whatever, I don't think that they had the vision that they wanted me to really go to music school. I think once I got into music school, they were happy about that. But like my father, I come from four generations of medical doctor people in my family, and my immediate family is like literally 4 cousins, and like my dad's brother is an MD, my dad was an MD, his father was an MD, so that you can see there was a lot of pressure on me to be a doctor, right?
Sure.
So I kind of had this alternative life of trying to figure out if that was something that I wanted to do. So I got my EMT license, and I was working as a ski patrolman in Northern California, kind of in the off time from school. So like I was working on weekends as a ski patrolman in Boreal Ridge in Northern California, and then kind of in the time period between that high school and when I went to Berkeley, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to decide, like, should I be a healthcare professional or should I be a musician? And I started working as a EMT for an ambulance company in Northern California in Oakland, and got the experience of, scooping people up off the pavement for $15 an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have always gone the route of like a Greg from Bad Religion and, be the singing PhD.
Yeah,
maybe there's a way to bring these together. I don't know.
I've never been that smart. It was just kind of this weird journey for me. And I saw right away that even though the pressure that it was on me from my family to do that, I just discovered it was not really for me. So I had that journey going on. I also, all through my teenage years, the summers, I worked as a camp counselor at a Boy Scout camp.
So did I.
Did you? Right on. That's hilarious. Maybe we're brothers. I was adopted. Do you have any brothers and sisters you don't know about?
If I do, I'm going to have a conversation with my dad.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Jeez, apparently there's something in the water for audio engineers.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, I have always been a perfectionist and achieving for greatness. I think up until recently, I was the youngest Eagle Scout in Northern California. I think recently some guy got his Eagle Scout when he was like 14 or something, something crazy, whatever. But I got my Eagle Scout when I was like just turned 16.
It was a prerequisite for me to get my driver's license. So I got it when I was like 16 and a half, like 3 months into it. So I was on top of that because I had to drive.
See, there you go. So anyway, I worked for this Boy Scout camp in Northern California in the hills near Yosemite, a place called Wolfboro. And so you know what? I mean, I just had all of these kind of different directions that I was going in, but the focus, it really came down to, you know what? I love music. I'm going to go to Berkeley College of Music. And I had that one experience of working in the studio, but I didn't have it in my head that I was going to go to Berkeley and become a music production engineering student. That wasn't my goal. I was going to Berkeley to be a musician. And I went there, and the first semester, I started looking around and going, holy crap. I went there as a bass player, by the way. And because you have to pick your instrument when you go to Berkeley, you have to say, okay, this is the instrument that I'm going to do all of my proficiency exams on. And I looked around and I went, there is like 30 bass players that are way better than I am. This isn't going to work for me. And so I started looking for alternative things. And one of those was the music production and engineering program, which is the study of what I do now.
Yeah. So I wanted to just comment real quick. So, I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting about your story is, as you look at it and you sort of meander and you took the temperature of different fields and things like that. Like, I think that diversity in practice is really important for a lot of people. I think that, nowadays, especially, you hear a lot of people talking about chasing their passions and things like that. And ultimately it sounds like that's where you landed, was you were able to chase down something that then became your passion. But it's like almost without the contrast of having seen everything else, then it leaves doubt, right? You start and think, oh God, well, maybe I could have been an MD. Maybe I could have pulled it out.
Sure.
But, having tasted that, you can go, no, that wasn't for me. So I think it's really great, your journey, even if it feels a little meandery. I think it's great that you went through all that.
Well, thanks. I always tell people, the question is always like, people ask me like, how do I get your job? And I always tell people it is not about having a skill, right? It's not about being the best engineer in the world. It's truly about how you interact with people, right? Like, are you able to have a conversation with somebody and get what you need out of them, and they perceive that they're getting what they need from you? Those are real skills to have, right? And I think that in my journey, that's where I got those skills. I didn't have this single path that a lot of people have. I meandered around and like had to figure out how am I going to interact with people, and still to this day, the way that the reason for my success, I'll tell you, is because I can walk into a room full of crazy people and identify with every single one of them and figure out like what's going on with each of them. That's an important skill to have.
Well, I that was one of the questions I was going to ask you later on, was interacting with some of these artists. You almost have to, I mean, you've got a drunk bass player, you got a lead singer that needs this, you got, so trying to deal with all of that craziness has got to be hard sometimes. And having those people skills is probably one of the most important parts.
It's the weirdest. I am put in the weirdest situations, right? Like, I am thrown into a room with someone like Justin Bieber, let's say, that I have nothing in common with a 23-year-old billionaire. I mean, that's what he is, or he was when I worked for him. He was 23 years old and he was a billionaire. And I have nothing in common with that guy, right? Like everything that guy does is, he'll say, I want a coffee, and someone, jumps on their feet and runs and gets him a coffee. You know what I mean? None of that like happens in my world. Yet I'm able to walk into that room and still have a conversation where he perceives that I know exactly what he's talking about and can get what he needs from me. So I don't know if that is that I'm good at, I'm good at having a shell of showing, because really, like behind the scenes in my own head, I'm going, I have no idea what this kid is talking about.
Well, I think it's a combination of things, right? I mean, first of all, especially if you're front of house, I mean, these musicians are relying on you, right? I mean, if Bieber comes off bad, it's your fault.
That's right.
so, I think there's probably this little bit of mutual adoration. Maybe you don't have, $1 billion in the checking account, as so few of us do, Lord willing though. And, yes. but I suspect that there's got to be sort of a professional respect that goes both ways, in that, as good as he is, he's standing on a street corner singing without the front of house guy.
Absolutely. 100%.
So I think there's a shared value there where you're both sort of, equal partners, even if he's the one being paid for it.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's part of it. I think that he trusts his own people that surround him to tell him that he has the best sound guy in the world. You know what I mean? So there's that respect that he knows that I've been hired to do a job, and he's expecting me to have some sort of level of thing. But just on kind of just a people skill level, that's a weird thing to have, is to be able to, walk in there. And I just noticed that in my own perception of people now. And honestly, this is not something really, I've kind of developed it as a skill over time, but I will tell you that this is God-given. This is not something that I figured out. I think it's just a thing that I have, which is the perception of knowing what that person needs from me, or what that person is getting at when they're saying something very strange,
Yeah. No, well, and I think it's, it's a combination of many things, right? I think this value is a piece of it. There's certainly a skill level, like you mentioned, it's more important, these people skills maybe than, technical knowledge, for example. But when you have both, man, you're a powerhouse, right? You've got the technical knowledge, but then you also have this, innate ability to read people and, help people feel comfortable, right? They know that they can rely on you and trust you. So, I mean, yeah, those are all great characteristics to lean into.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to deliver, right? Like when given the opportunity, you still have to be the guy that, makes the field goal. But, my point is to telling people that want my job, or people that are interested in this kind of industry, is learn those things first. Like you should be going and studying psychology 101 over being, studying advanced mixing, but you're absolutely right. In the end, you better be able to deliver.
Well, so can you take us back? So you started to get into it. Basically, we're back at Berkeley. You've switched from bass to now you're getting into production. How does that happen? And long before we get to Justin Bieber, how do we get to, I don't know, Justin Jones or some random guy that works nearby?
Actually, yeah, I kind of want to jump in on this too,
Sure.
just because time frame wise, it's in the audio world, it's kind of early on, right? I don't want to date you too much, but this was pre-digital consoles, right?
It was.
Okay. So, and you weren't focusing on live, you were focusing on studio recording for the most part, correct?
I was.
So how do you go from school to studio to live?
It's another meandering journey. I had no desire. Being a live sound engineer, when I was at Berkeley, was not on my radar, period. when I first moved to Berkeley, I went to a local studio there and asked them to do anything. I'll take out the garbage. I'll do whatever it takes. And I met with the owner, and for some reason, he kind of he took a liking to me. I still remember this dude, Ken Canavas, man. He was a guy that gave me an opportunity. There were, at the time when I was going to Berkeley, this is like 1988. There were like 300 music production and engineering students that all could have done the same thing that I did, which was go to this studio and say, I'll do anything. And for some reason, he liked me. And so that was cool and gave me the opportunity. And for the whole first entire year, all I did was make coffee and took the garbage out. And I was like fly on the wall, watching what other recording engineers and producers were doing. Fast forward to 4 years later, as I'm going to school, 4 years later, I am the head engineer of that recording studio, having taken a lot of the jobs of the guys that taught me a lot of stuff. So, it was a time period in my life where I didn't sleep. I was literally working, from 11 p.m. until 7 in the morning in the studio with clients, and then going to school. And then I had a job parking cars too. That was like 3 hours in the afternoon. So, I think I've always been kind of a go-getter, and I'm just gonna, whatever. But how I got into live sound was when I graduated from Berkeley. I had some credits as a engineer and a producer from working in that studio in Boston. So I already had some credits. So moving to Los Angeles, you either move to LA, Nashville, or New York when you're a recording engineer at that time period. Those are the three places. I moved to Los Angeles, and I started in Los Angeles as a recording engineer and a producer, and as an assistant. And I got to be an assistant for some major producers of the day. One guy's name is Bruce Swedien. He's a guy who's produced pretty much every Michael Jackson record, amongst thousands of others. He's world renowned producer. So I got to be an assistant for him a couple of times. And I started doing my own projects, and my big break as a recording engineer was a band called Tony.
Mm-hmm.
If I had no loot.
That's it.
I thank you for that one.
That's funny. You should thank me for that. That's the song that I worked with. One of the songs on that record.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, but that story is trippy too, right? Like there is no reason why a 21-year-old kid should have the opportunity to work for Tony. And the reason that happened was Tony was kind of at the height of their career. They went to Trinidad to record that album and spent all their money and didn't have anything recorded. And so the record company said, you're coming back to Los Angeles, and you're going to work in the cheapest studio in town, and you're going to finish this record. Wow. Well, guess who was working at the cheapest studio in town? Right? So I got that opportunity because I was working at the cheapest studio in town, Paramount Recording Studio. And I happened to be the guy that they assigned to be the engineer. And so, a lot of these opportunities I set myself up for these opportunities, but they were truly like right place at right time. I hate that I say that, but that really is what's happened to me.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting about your story so far is, and just as far as like maybe a takeaway that people can go and actually enact themselves, I think, and I know that this isn't the most popular thing in the world anymore, but the value of working for free. I think it's so important to spend this time going and learning, and it's funny, like when I was, 17, 18, I was working for a number of different musical groups on their, street teams and helping build, street level marketing for bands that had no budgets, basically. And so I spent a lot of time doing that work for free, but that eventually became, opportunities with the record label, eventually became opportunities to tour manage and do some other things like that with these different groups. In fact, I know one of the bands on your roster, Linkin Park, we toured with those guys back in the days before they were anyone. And, there's a bunch of those stories, but it all had to do with that. And even in my sort of professional career, so much of it had to do with giving of yourself first, and then the good stuff comes later. And so, again, we were talking about sort of a meandery tale, that it took all these different things. But I sort of live by this idea that, it took every step I've ever taken to get to this conversation today, right? There was no other way. There wasn't a straight path. Not something I could put on a map and give to Mike and say, this is how you get to be me today. But what it requires is this really meandery walk to figure out what it is. And only then do you understand that all the stuff you did before was laying the groundwork for this.
Absolutely, 100%. And it is, like we spoke of before, it's like you better be able to deliver when someone gives you that opportunity, right? So,
if I had no loot jam as a finger popper, so you did good on that one.
I had nothing to do with the writing of the songs. The songs are amazing, but I did record all that.
That's funny.
But so anyway, I had this bustling kind of recording engineer career going on, and it was a time period when there wasn't home studios. People didn't have Pro Tools on their laptops. It was pretty much like the only place that you would make records is in studios. And so I had this career that was going on. I worked on a bunch of things that got nominated for Grammys, and I was starting to build a reputation for myself, and I ended up working for a hair band called Warrant.
Nice.
And they were doing demos for their next record. And it's coming off of they had this hit record called Cherry Pie. And so I was doing the demos for whatever the next record was going to turn into be. And the guy, the lead singer, he's not alive anymore, but the lead singer turned to me and said, "Hey, we just fired our live sound guy. Why don't you come mix our show tomorrow?" And I had literally never, ever mixed a live show in my life. I had played live shows as a musician, but never paid attention to what the live sound guy was doing. Wasn't even on my radar,
So
if you're coming off Cherry Pie, that's Warrant at their peak. That's not like Warrant Garage.
So really quick, the end part of that story is that the next day I literally found myself mixing them in an arena at the LA Forum, opening for this other heavy metal band called Rat. And all of a sudden I was like a guy that had never mixed live sound, and now I'm sitting at a console at the LA Forum with 12,000 people. And
and I want to jump in a little bit, because there's a huge difference between a studio session and a live session, because not only do you have front of house, you have monitor mix, and this is in the days of analog too. So it's not like you can just jump in and tame the beast. It's like there's a lot of different moving parts in the live show that don't exist in a studio environment. How did that go over? In an arena forum, I don't even do live stuff because I'm a studio guy and I've never had the experience of doing live. And I am intimidated to try and go and mix a band just because of the live aspect of it. And going from studio to live has got to be night and day. How was that?
It was, and you got to realize the technology of the time for live sound was not good either. We were literally high-fiving each other when you could hear the vocal all night. That was what it was like. It was absolutely completely foreign to me. But I tell you, in my own brain, I'm sure, I'm like, oh, that show went really well. It probably didn't go very well. But what I did fall in love with immediately was the instant gratification of 12,000 people screaming for something that you're doing, or a part of. Anytime the guy plays a guitar solo and I'm turning the guitar solo up, and 10,000 people scream for that. They're screaming for the guitar. They're screaming for the guitarist, really. But I'm a part of that. You know what I mean? And so even now, later on in my career, I still the hair stand up on my arms when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And that made me I didn't even look at studio after that. I was like, yeah, whatever. This is where it's at, man.
So Ryan and I have a history of promoting shows. We did a bunch down in Phoenix, and I did a big show here in Idaho for 4,000 plus people. But it was what I'm getting at is when we promoted the shows down in Phoenix, I was the lighting guy, and I sat behind the board and I created the mood, and I created oh, we got a drum fill, let's strobe and let's do this. And people don't realize that the lighting guy, the sound guy, the people that are involved in the show are performing just as much as the people on stage are, but the accolades aren't necessarily drawn our way because we're kind of behind the scenes. Do you still get like pre-show jitters? And do you still kind of, I mean, like you're performing almost as much, if not more, than what the lead singer and the guitar player are doing. Do you still kind of get nervous coming into a big arena and okay, let's do this?
Of course. It's still very, absolutely. Right before a show starts, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong. And so, the few minutes leading up to when a show begins and all of a sudden things start feeling like everything's working, those are very tense moments even to this day.
So coming into a big arena show, you've got you're flying arrays, you've got all sorts of crazy different environments coming into each arena. What do you use for a reference mix when you come in? Are you using like a studio recording and checking the speakers with that, or are you doing a rough mix and kind of adjusting as the night goes on, because each environment's different?
It is. So prior to about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, we would use a recording that we were very familiar with, or several recordings that we were very familiar with. For me, that meant I had a Tears for Fears recording that I was like super familiar with and knew what it sounded like in every kind of different room. And I would pop that into the CD player and listen to it and hear what the room was doing. And then we would make adjustments to the speakers in regards to that particular song. Usually it would be a bunch of different songs. And the reason is each recording had its own purpose. One recording was so that we could listen to the low end part of the PA. Another recording was for the mid range. Another was for the high end. And so there would be 2 or 3 songs that we would, use. But what happened about 10 years ago is, along with digital technology, is a thing called virtual playback, which allows you to take all of your recordings, multi-track recordings of the night before, and play it through your console again, and be able to kind of recreate what it's going to be like when the band plays. And so nowadays, I pretty much use that exclusively as a recording of the previous night.
That's so awesome that you have the ability to do that. Just open the Pro Tools session and start doing a mix down and get it kind of done or
That's
close. Right. And then when they jump on, you're almost exactly what you were the night before. So that's pretty neat that the technology exists. Can you talk about the switch over from analog to digital and how that affected the industry? And I know still to this day, there's guys that are hesitant to even use digital. Is it Queens of the Stone Age? They're still using an analog board?
There's a couple of them. Yeah. What sucks in all this is that I had to live it twice. I lived it in the studio. I have a vivid memory of a guy rolling in a brand new digital tape machine. It was a Mitsubishi X850 32-track digital tape machine, and it was the first digital machine that anyone had seen. And he's rolling it into the studio, and I have this vivid memory of like 5 of us standing around it, like, cavemen looking at a rocket ship. We're just like, what is this thing? And so I kind of lived that. And for those of you that don't know a lot about audio, there were some really dark days in the switch from analog to digital. Probably almost 2 years of like kind of everybody that was an audio professional was not happy with the results that digital audio was doing. And it was, there was a whole time period there where there were people pushing back on that. And we're like, nope, digital audio sucks. I don't want it. And it took a long time for that to come into play. Well, the same thing happened in live sound, but it happened 10 years later. So I was the guy that got to live it in live sound land. I say this all the time. It's like, it's been even as close as maybe 5 years ago where I really felt like digital audio is fine and we should be ignoring analog. The stuff, the benefits that you get from the digital audio realm are outweigh what you can do in analog world. And it sounds good enough now that we're cool with it. But that only happened like 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and like you're saying, I mean, it's good enough, right? I mean, it's still, I think a lot of people would, argue for analog, especially like the vinyl guys and stuff like that. And it's interesting. We just did, or recently I went over to a friend's house. He's got, one of these $50,000 hi-fis in his house. And he had never played vinyl through it. He'd always done, some high quality thing through, one of these digital distribution services or whatever. And we plugged in just my crappy old, record player that's 30 years old, just, with an old worn out needle. And we're playing just, some old stuff, some Al Green, some things like that through it. And then playing the digital equivalent. And it's remarkable how much difference there is. And, if you weren't playing them side by side, you probably wouldn't know. You'd be fine with digital, right? But but after that, he ran right out and started getting into vinyl recordings because he was just like, I can't even believe how much warmer it is and how different it is. So it's true. I wonder, though, if we can go back just a little bit and talk about sort of, I mean, you've played the forum now. I mean, what a baptism by fire that is, by the way. I mean, versus, starting at some CD club in LA, you go right to the forum. But what's it like for a young professional trying to find work in that field? Like once you've done that show, I imagine maybe word gets around or maybe, you start to become known. I think it's kind of a small community. So I imagine that word starts to spread. But I mean, is that how you moved through this or how did you actually make this into a sustainable career?
Yeah, that's really interesting question. I certainly didn't get more work just based upon that one show. This was an uphill battle over many years. It's kind of weird that I just threw away a pretty thriving studio career. But I was young and I saw the opportunity. Hey man, you get to tour the world. And I think back then more so now than now, it was, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it had a lot of, draw. I was like, I don't care that I'm not making any money, But no, I mean, this was not an overnight thing. I worked with that band Warrant for like 6 years and pretty much like followed them all the way to. I have a vivid memory of myself and two other guys driving a van across the country with the band in the van and a U-Haul on the back. And literally, like, as I'm driving in the middle of the night in Texas, I'm going, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Excuse my mouth. What am I doing here? So there were, ebb and flow to all of that. Right. But in general, to answer your question, this is a completely word of mouth business, and your reputation is the reason that your phone rings. There are a small amount of people that are getting the opportunity at the biggest gigs. So it's a you of I truly believe this, that if you do good work, people will talk about you. So if you are, I always tell people, like, the number one thing is don't be a dick. Right? I mean, if you are a guy that gets along with people and are known to get a good result as a sound person, then I truly believe that the job will find you. But if any of that is wrong, there are amazing I can name you 2 engineers, and I'm not gonna, but 2 engineers who are top engineers, even I would say maybe better engineers than I am, that cannot get work right now because they're hard to work with.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important distinction, because it really is true. I mean, I think, and I imagine as sort of our whole world has evolved, but so has, the music industry specifically, there's probably a little less room for these prima donna, hard to work with folks than there once was.
That's true.
And so I think, as we go, and I mean, I think it's true just of being human, right? I mean, don't be a dick. The cooler you can be, or the easier you are to work with, I mean, obviously that attracts people. But I think that's a great observation that, even though these guys may be masters of the skill,
That's right.
they understand the physical bit of how to do this. They don't have that soft skill. They don't understand how to play nice. And as a result, they're not working.
That's true. And I'm sure that happens in all businesses, but particularly in a business that is word of mouth, that guy's not going to work.
Yeah. So I actually want to kind of change focuses a little bit here. I actually want to talk about the day-to-day life of someone that's on the road in your industry.
Sure.
How many days a year are you on the road? What's a normal work week look like? And what's day of look like?
Generally, I am touring away from home for 10 months out of the year. And it's not 10 months solid. It'll be, like whatever, 8 weeks or 10 weeks solid, and then home for less than a week, and then another 10 weeks. And it goes like that. Iron Maiden is a little bit different in that they work, 4 to 5 months a year, and they work those 4 months straight. So that, in that situation, I'm actually gone from home for 4 months straight and then come back. So there are time periods where, you're gone from your family for extended periods of time. And I think that's what makes this job a little bit hard for some people is, it's hard to have a family when you're not there. So you have to have a spouse. In my case, my spouse is super strong, kind of has her own life going on when I'm not there, and then allows me to incorporate into her life, when I get back. So it's worked out for us, but so those are the length of times that I'm gone. The average day for me kind of starts around 7 a.m. usually. 7 a.m. is when the trucks are all backed into a loading dock area and start dumping all of the gear. The technology nowadays requires sound guys to actually go into a room and take measurements of that room empty, and then input those things into a piece of software that gives you a model of what that room looks like because of your measurements. And then you spend a bunch of time in that piece of software making decisions about how many speakers there's going to be and what they're going to be pointed at, and that kind of stuff. And so there's a bunch of computer manipulation that happens probably for a couple of hours from 7 until 9. And then the speakers come off the truck. We hang all the speakers. Everybody's kind of working together all day long. The doors open for people generally around 6 o'clock. Prior to that, depending on the band, I'll have a sound check, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And a lot of guys, because of that technology I spoke of earlier, that virtual playback, bands, more and more bands are not doing sound checks. They're just letting me do that technology, and it seems to be working well. So that's different these days. Then there's that period from when doors open at 6 until generally a headliner show starts at 9. So I am usually out of the building from 6:30 until about 8. So that's my kind of break during the day. Then we do the show. Show immediately gets over. We kick everybody else out. And what took us 13 hours to load in takes us about 2.5 hours to put back into trucks. And the reason is that we don't care what's broken. We don't care. Literally, we're just ripping stuff up and throwing it in a box and being like, okay, tomorrow we're going to fix it. That's not to say that there is an order to it. There is, and there has to be. but I'm just talking about how much faster it is on the out is because of those kind of things. So we're usually driving away from a venue about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then we drive for 5 hours to wherever the next place is and do it again at 7 a.m.
So do you average 2 shows a week normally? That's about
Generally,
it?
most people do 3 shows in a row and then a day off.
Okay.
And depending on the band, the day off could be a long drive to somewhere else. So a day off may mean you stuck on a bus.
The reason I'm asking all these questions is because I'm at a turning point in my life where I'm thinking about maybe going down this road.
Are you?
And well, I mean, it only makes sense at this point. And
Cool.
The day-to-day life and the 3 days on, day off, and gone 10 weeks and back for a week and stuff like that is the type of stuff that I think a lot of people don't think of when they're getting in this career, and they don't realize that it takes a toll. It's a lot of work. It's stressful, and it's something you have to take into consideration before you jump in.
Yeah, I think it's just, to kind of cap that story, I think it's just one of those things that, the career itself, or the act of being a touring person or whatever, all that business is really glamorized. And, I think most people would aspire to that. Like, oh my God, if only I could be on tour all the time, or whatever. But I think once you finally have the opportunity to do it, and it's funny hearing your stories about cruising across Texas in the van with Rat, or Warrant, excuse me.
Warrant, yeah.
Like in one of my past lives in a touring story, we had taken an RV from California out to Asheville, North Carolina, where it subsequently exploded. And then we had to rent a Ford Explorer and pull a trailer with us for like 10 nights of a tour. And it was just, but it's a nightmare. You see yourself crammed in this box or, this little truck with 6 guys, you're sleeping on the floor of hotel rooms and whatever you can scrape together. I mean, it's not easy on a body, but I do like how you pointed out how it's working like in your relationship too. My wife met me and we ended up getting married in the time when I was still running around with the bands a lot. And also a very strong, very independent person. And so she's capable of managing when I'm not around. And even now, I don't work with the bands anymore, but I still travel quite a bit. And, having the right partner has made me able to do this work. And, and I'm sure that's the same for you. Like it would be mighty hard to, or mighty lonely if you didn't find the right kind of partner.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. I know there are people in my industry that make relationships and even families. I don't have any kids. And we made a conscious decision because of that, because I'm gone all the time. We both kind of decided that it just doesn't make sense for us to have kids. I have tons of nephews and nieces. And so whatever, I have this huge extended family. But there are roadies. There are other guys that I work with that have many kids, 5, 6 kids. And I always wonder, like, how does that get managed? And I would say, unfortunately, there's a pretty high amount of divorce going on in my business. And that is simply because people aren't at home to do that. And they're basically making their spouse be a single parent,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and circle back to like the Iron Maidens of the world. I mean, 95% of bands, 99% of bands aren't traveling by plane, aren't traveling by tour bus.
That's true.
They're making $200 a night to go play some crappy bar in somewhere in Iowa. Yeah. And, they don't get to fly home on the weekends and see their family. I mean, if you're Lars Ulrich, you get to fly home after and go home and have dinner, and then you'll meet him in the next city, but but most people don't have that experience. And so I can imagine, it's kind of a young man's game. And if you try and pursue it into later life, you have to find the support system to make that happen. So I think it's
I mean, we should point out the good parts of this too. I mean, there's a lot of great things about what I do and what I have done. I've seen the world. I've been to every single country except for a few countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa. I'm trying to think where else maybe I haven't been. I haven't been to the South Pole yet. But
don't worry, with all this Corona stuff going on, that might be the one safe place to perform.
For sure. But the point is that, I've been to the world. I've seen the world. I've been to, places that everyone wants to go to multiple times. And so that part of what I do is pretty amazing. And was kind of the reason that I got into this in the beginning.
Yeah. And I mean, I did it on a much smaller scale, but to sort of echo your story, I mean, I saw just about every state in the union, while we were running around for my little short stint of tour managing a couple different bands. And, I mean, what a cool experience. What a cool way to see these cities, I mean, it's pretty incredible. So I think to your point, yeah, I mean, there's, two sides of the coin, right? There may be some challenges, but it's not unlike any other career or any other life choice or any other anything. There's goods and bads. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, not to, help my own self out, but to help my own self out, what, as someone who might be thinking about going down this road and trying to get into the live circuit, what's an entry point for someone like me who is out of school, never worked live, never worked in the touring establishment, sign up to be a roadie and just go in that route and get coffee for you?
Well, it's funny, that used to be, this business used to be people that didn't really need to have skills. We called it the cocaine cowboys. They were like the guys that were, like Lost Boys, like total circus dudes, those were the guys that became the carpenters or, whatever, because they didn't have a skill. Nowadays, it's really a business and people are looking for people that have skills, like yourself that maybe went to a school. But even at that, getting to be a mixer in this business is just like any other business, in the sense you have to start at the bottom and be the guy that empties the garbage can. But the way that most people do that is by getting a job working with one of the major touring sound vendors in the world. So, for example, Clair Brothers in Pennsylvania is pretty much the biggest. They're called Clair Global because they're the biggest global sound company in the world. And they have, upwards of 500 employees that are all touring professional guys. Getting a job with them and working in their shop for the first year, soldering. I call it the slave ship because there's like there's kids that are like have soldering guns and they're like being forced to solder things, But anyway, I mean, be that guy and let them train you on their gear. And, that is a path to becoming a mixer, right? There are guys that, started like that. And then 3 years later, were given some opportunity to mix monitors for somebody, et cetera, et cetera. That is kind of the slow way, but it's the tried and true way. Nowadays, most bands are being come from the internet. They have a YouTube channel or whatever. So getting in with a band, maybe as their recording engineer, since you have that skill, and saying, "Hey, I'd love to mix your live stuff." Travel with them as they get big, and hang on to them as they get bigger. Generally, bands are loyal to somebody that's been with them from the beginning. So that is another path. I can't think of another one that's like really prevalent, but people come from all kinds of weird ways, and more so these days, being a recording engineer and being a live sound engineer are kind of, they've melded together. There used to be a very big distinction between a live sound engineer and a recording engineer. Nowadays, there's a lot of recording engineers that are live sound engineers and vice versa.
That's awesome. Well, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Really appreciate it. I think the conversation was amazing. Where can people find you? I know you just started a YouTube channel and you're doing a podcast that's more audio related. So if you're listening to this and wish we would have gone down some, EQing techniques, tune into your podcast on YouTube. I think you were talking about mixing with 3 guitars on your latest episode. And that's an aspect I never thought about. Where do you put the third guitar?
True. It's true. Yeah, it's weird. Like, so in this new normal where we're stuck at home, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. So I better figure out like how to make a YouTube channel. So I would say in the last like month, I've been trying to figure out how to do all that, or the last 3 weeks probably. But yes, so I have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just search Pooch Sound Engineer, you'll find my channel and all kinds of stuff. My Instagram is FOH_engineer_Pooch, POOCH. And also Facebook is the same for now, FOH engineer Pooch. So
I know you get this all the time, and you probably hate it, but you got your nickname from Motley Crue, right?
Yes. So it started as like Big Dog. Like they started calling me Big Dog. And then Vince Neil was the one that really turned it into Pooch. He started calling me Pooch. And then the weirdest thing, of course, you've seen in how my career is, I went working from Motley Crue to Whitney Houston, 2 totally opposite things. And when I got to Whitney Houston, she loved Pooch. And so it just kind of stuck. And then there was this weird time period where people couldn't make the distinction between whether Ken and Pooch were the same person. So I was actually missing jobs because I didn't just accept the nickname. And so
how funny.
It is what it is.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, Ken. We really appreciate your time. This has been awesome. And everybody, check out his website, check out the new YouTube channel. And by the way, since you're new to YouTube, if you need any help, give us a shout. We can help you out with that.
All right. I need it.
So everybody check that out. Thanks so much for listening this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.